Josh Warrington versus Mauricio Lara. Let's talk about the fight. Well, I, like many of you, was surprised that this fight ended the way that it did, because for me, the fight itself wasn't even an afterthought. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about Warrington versus Lara. I looked at the fight as merely a prelude to a bigger fight, a Kansu fight.
I really didn't spend a lot of time wondering what was going to happen here.
Really didn't spend a lot of time wondering what the outcome of this match was going to be. So don't accuse me of being the Monday morning quarterback when I say that. If I have to wrap my mind around what I saw in Warrington versus Lara and why I saw it, what immediately comes to mind are the 16 months of inactivity between this fight and Josh Warrington's last fight.
The guy was flat.
Perhaps uninspired even. He did have a rocky start to this match, that first round. And in that first round, what I noticed immediately, for those of you that follow Ring IQ on Twitter, I did discuss the fight live, tweet by tweet. What I noticed almost immediately is that Mauricio Lara, who I was not familiar with up until this fight.
But I am now.
What I noticed almost immediately is that this guy has sneaky power. He's got very heavy hands.
At least too heavy for Josh.
Josh found this out hard way in the first round as he got off to a rocky start, and he came to his senses in the second.
That's when he got into this fight for me.
Once again, I have to say that I'm no Monday morning quarterback. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what I saw and why I saw it. I think that Josh had no real concept of how big a puncher Mauricio Lara was, and that's why he came out the way that he did, quite cavalier, throwing lots of shots. And for what it's worth, throwing lots of shots, being an action guy, an artillery guy, a volume guy, that is and always has been Josh Warrington's calling card.
But after 16 months of inactivity?
I do think he went out there a bit flat.
He did.
I do think he was a bit cavalier in his approach. I do think that Mauricio Lara looked very sharp out there. You could identify his game plan almost immediately, that this guy is throwing everything with bad intentions, and what he's looking to do is land a home run punch.
A sound strategy.
What was proven to be a sound strategy, albeit a bit crude, sound. Nonetheless, as Josh Warrington is a volume puncher, he's known for letting his hands go. He is the kind of guy that you can catch between the punches. And having been inactive for the last 16 months, having not fought since October of 2019, yeah, Josh didn't look as sharp as he normally does.
He didn't.
And what that time off might have done to his overall condition, his punch resistance, having not been punched under the hot lights in that duration of time, I think it had an effect. I think that Josh looked a bit flat, and I think that Mauricio Lara looked a lot sharper than people expected him to. I've no doubts that the 4 fucking fights that he had last year have a lot to do with that.
How many guys managed to get 4 fights in during COVID times?
Because Mauricio Lara, he did, and I've no doubts that that's what you can attribute his sharpness to, that this guy wasn't lumped on the couch waiting for a phone call.
He's getting out there and he was fighting.
He managed to stop 3 of the 4 guys that he fought last year. And these ain't high-level, world-class fighters that he was stopping, but better still, he got the opportunity to get out there and keep the machine well-oiled, keep the machine in use. Whereas Josh didn't get to do anything last year.
That's not an excuse.
But I have to wrap my mind around what I saw. I have to reconcile this because Josh Warrington, former IBF featherweight champion Josh Warrington, with an unbeaten record, who's already faced several top 10 fighters in this division, how does he go out there and get trounced by this unheralded guy?
Explain it.
How does it happen? I think the 16 months of inactivity have something to do with it, and I think that Mauricio Lara, having fought 4 times last year, staying sharp, also has a lot to do with it.
If you want to be dismissive.
If you wish to ignore all of those aforementioned factors, then, it's not analysis that you're looking for. You're just looking to gloat. Well, unless any of you out there actually picked Mauricio Lara to win, Mauricio Lara, who was the underdog ahead of this fight, Mauricio Lara, who I didn't see a whole lot of people picking ahead of this thing. I saw most people treating the match the same way that I did.
Like what?
As little more than a prelude to a Kansu fight.
That's it.
Not even an afterthought, but better still. If you wish to ignore the 16 months of inactivity that Josh Warrington had ahead of this fight, and you wish to ignore that Mauricio Lara, this guy fought 4 times last year. If you want to ignore all of this, then it's not analysis you're looking for. You're just looking to gloat.
Why?
But unless you actually picked Mauricio Lara to win, what the fuck are you gloating about?
Now that's a Monday morning quarterback.
Understand that I ain't got a pony in the show. I don't have a horse in this race. This isn't a prediction that I got right or wrong because I didn't predict anything. I didn't spend too much time thinking about this fight. But for anyone out there who wants to gloat because Mauricio Lara knocked out Josh Warrington, to those individuals, I'll say, unless you picked Mauricio Lara to win...
Unless you did.
What the fuck are you gloating about? Oh, because you saw this coming? Then I'm sure you did very well with the bookies.
How much did you win, Rasputin?
The casually clairvoyant guys who are only really clairvoyant until after the fight's outcome has been decided. Because I reiterate, I didn't see very many, if anybody, picking Mauricio Lara to win this thing. So if anybody's taking issue with my analysis of what happened and why it happened, the way it happened, I have to ask.
Did you pick Lara to win?
Don't worry about me. I didn't pick anybody. Like I said, the fight wasn't even an afterthought as far as I'm concerned. But I am trying to reconcile what I saw and why I saw it. And I have to say, based on what I saw, the 16 months of inactivity hurt Josh Warrington. And those 4 fights that Mauricio Lara had in 2020, last year, they kept him sharp, kept him dangerous.
How Josh Warrington survived the 4th is beyond me.
Let's be honest, folks. A little bit of help from the ref, a little bit of consideration, a little bit more consideration than perhaps another fighter would have got, is how Josh Warrington was able to make it through the 4th round. Though myself, and I think a lot of you out there will agree, that the fight could have and perhaps should have been stopped then and there. And Josh fought valiantly. He showed a lot of heart because he actually managed to pick up rounds after having survived the onslaught in the 4th round. It's just that he never got his legs back. He never recovered. He never really had his faculties about him after being rocked in the 4th.
He's on borrowed time.
In spite of picking up the subsequent rounds after the 4th, he did appear to be on borrowed time. He did appear to be just one punch away from perhaps being put down and being put out. It was a real nail-biter. It was a fight that had a very entertaining, crowd-pleasing aesthetic in the absence of a crowd. It was a fun fight to watch, but it was a fight where I noticed Josh hasn't gotten his legs back yet.
The guy's running on fumes.
Off of heart and survival instincts alone, Josh Warrington was able to carry on into the 9th round, where he was subsequently stopped. He never fully recovered from the assault in the 4th round. Eddie Hearn has already made it known that there is a rematch clause. We'll see if Josh Warrington so decides to activate it. Does he want an immediate rematch with this guy? I don't know. If by the time this video is uploaded, news breaks
That he has
exercised the clause, then there you have it.
There's your answer.
And I choose not to look at this as doom and gloom. I mean, I am gutted for Josh, I really am. But at the same time, this is a shining example of what a fighter can do when he believes in himself. This is a shining example in Mauricio Lara, who was counted out by the bookies, counted out by the odds makers and the fans. They didn't even look at him as an afterthought. I know I didn't. He goes into hostile territory and he makes a big splash, a career-altering splash. This young, 22-year-old, unheralded fighter who pretty sure everybody's going to be talking about now. These days, you get a lot of fighters, they don't want to have to board a plane for their next fight. They're so focused on things not being in their favor, going into hostile territory. But it's fighters like Mauricio Lara that show what a fighter is capable of if he simply believes in himself, if he takes the opportunity, takes the chance, goes into hostile territory, and still manages to get the job done, because this is the theater of the unexpected after all. So congratulations to him. We then come to the lightweight contest between the former IBF champion Richard Commey and Jackson Mariñez. And, Richard Commey was very much Richard Commey in this fight. Comes out guns blazing, fast and furious. And I think that Mariñez, he put up a good effort, but he really was only fighting half of a fight. He exhibited very admirable defensive prowess, admirable defensive skills, using those legs, staying off the line, not giving Richard Commey a stationary target.
You don't want to just stand there with Richard.
But I think that if the fight worked out the way that it did, it's because Mariñez really was only fighting half of a fight. Defensively, he was very admirable, but offensively, he just wasn't putting much out there. He wasn't putting Richard Commey on notice, as there wasn't very much coming back at Richard Commey.
Not really.
Whilst he came forward, letting his hands go. Understand that Richard Commey is a characteristically aggressive fighter.
He is.
You are going to need good defensive prowess to offset this guy's aggression, to not get hit with any punches that you don't need to get hit with, but you've got to try to land punches of your own. You've got to try to get this guy to simmer down.
Get his respect.
If you're not landing with authority and giving him something to think about as he comes forward, guess what he's going to do?
What?
He's going to come forward. And for the 6 rounds that this fight lasted, for the 6 rounds that it went, that's really what resonated with me the most, that I wanted to see more in terms of offense from Mariñez, because if all he's going to do is work around Richard,
Well,
Richard's just going to run him down.
Gonna run him over.
And in so many words, that's what Richard did. Mariñez, he has his virtues. It's just that power isn't one of them. He's dropped 2 times in this fight, and Richard Commey closed the show off a monster right hand.
That finished Mariñez.
With that, Richard Commey rebounds off the loss to Teofimo Lopez, and now he's back in the conversation, back in the mix of everything. Fights like Commey versus Tago, Commey versus Nakatani, Commey versus Lomachenko,
Commey versus Haney.
Commey versus Verdejo. These are realistic propositions for the former IBF champion, who proved last night that while he's not the most subtle of guys or the most nuanced, he ain't nothing to fuck with. Richard Commey is not to be trifled with.
Congratulations to him.
We then come to the Golden Boy Promotions card that featured the then reigning WBO junior middleweight champion Patrick Teixeira defending his title against the very game, very well-schooled Brian Castaño of Argentina. This is a fight that worked out as I expected, as I predicted. I did predict that Brian would be the new WBO champion at this weight and subsequently take that WBO title to PBC Island to potentially unify it with Jermell Charlo, the only other champion at this weight, the Lineal and Ring Magazine unified champion at this weight. In terms of what we saw yesterday, we saw many of Brian's calling cards. What makes Brian a handful for anybody at 154 pounds is he's a stumpy fighter, a shorter fighter with a lower center of gravity that can really move, that can really come forward and simultaneously stay off the line. And as he does this and closes the gap, he throws punches in bunches. He flusters a guy.
He's tricky.
To Patrick Teixeira's credit, he was able to hang in there. He was able to go the distance, but outside of that, in terms of formulating a response, an adequate response to the constant aggression from Brian Castaño, that's really where Patrick came up short. He's just getting pushed around.
Tempting to battle Brian back.
But Brian, being the shorter fighter with the lower center of gravity and simultaneously being the more athletically gifted fighter, that created a situation to where the much more statuesque Patrick Teixeira is struggling to land and land with authority, to get this guy's respect, get his attention. There were some shots that got through for Patrick, there were, but Brian Castaño took those shots well.
They didn't faze him.
The aesthetic of the match, in so many words, was Brian Castaño pushing Patrick Teixeira from one side of the ring to the other, from one turnbuckle to the other turnbuckle.
And to the other.
Brian Castaño very much is the real thing. His amateur exploits include a win over Errol Spence Jr. In the World Series of Boxing, he locked horns with the Ukraine's own Sergei Derevyanchenko.
Beat him too.
Pro ranks, he locked horns with Michael Soro and Erislandi Lara. Believe you me, whilst not having the most robust resume as far as junior welterweights go, make no mistake that Brian Castaño is no mug.
The guy's serious business.
There really isn't much missing from Brian Castaño's repertoire. He's elusive, he's tricky, he's got fast feet, fast hands, throws punches in bunches. His only real drawback is that, perhaps he's not the biggest puncher. But when a guy's a handful, like Brian is a handful, he doesn't necessarily need to be the biggest puncher.
He is a very educated pressure fighter.
Pressure being Brian Castaño's calling card. Pressure he applies. That's what he's good at. That's how he won yesterday's fight.
Against the very durable Patrick Teixeira.
Who, whilst being a durable guy himself, just lacked the accuracy and nuance to contend with Brian's very persistent attack. In order to deal with a guy like Brian, not only do you have to be accurate, but you have to be accurate on the go, on the fly. You really need to be a sharpshooter to deal with a guy like Brian Castaño. And it just so happens that Jermell Charlo, the only other champion at this weight, he has a bit of a reputation for being a sharpshooter. That WBO title is going to the PBC side of the street. And I don't often celebrate when world titles end up on PBC Island, but in this instance, it is cause for celebration because now the undisputed junior middleweight
championship
title fight can be made with little to no network or promotional issues. Brian Castaño is a PBC fighter, after all.
So I imagine that that's what's going to be next.
Congratulations to Argentina's own newly crowned WBO junior middleweight champion, Brian Castaño. And finally, we come to the main event of that same card, the super featherweight IBF title fight between Rakhimov and the disgraced champion Jojo Diaz, who blew the weight and lost his title on the scales. The fight's aesthetic was just as pleasing as what I expected it to be, though ultimately the fight's outcome left me a little bit dissatisfied. I would have much rather seen a champion emerge from all of this than, what we got. What we got was a draw. The way I saw this thing, Rakhimov really was the ring general. He was dictating the pace. He was initiating all the action. It's not that Jojo Diaz didn't fight a good fight. He did, but it was reactionary. It was all in reaction to what Shavkat is doing. Shavkat's speed, his combinations, his movement, his footwork, his maneuvers. That was the highlight of the night for me as far as this fight. And I felt that Shavkat, maybe he won this thing 7-5.
It kind of looked that way.
Anecdotally, of course, but that being said, 7-5 could easily be a draw if you're off by a round, so I'm not up in arms over the fight's outcome. It's just dissatisfying because with the fight having been scored a draw, the IBF title remains vacant, and it's like the fight itself never happened, or it might as well have not happened, since there is no outcome and there is no IBF champion.
Jojo looked better than I expected.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting Jojo to look as formidable as he did. Having blown the weight and lost the title on the scales, he very much appeared to me to be an uninspired fighter. But he really did hold his own in this fight, and I think that's noteworthy. It's just a great pity that in spite of holding his own, with the fight's outcome being what it was, if he was still the IBF champion, had he not blown the weight, he wouldn't have lost the title. He would have still been the reigning IBF super featherweight champion in a draw situation.
He fought his ass off.
And so did Rakhimov, who, if nothing else, gave a good account of himself in this fight, though I reiterate,
I had him winning.
From where I was sitting, this really did look like a fight that Shavkat was winning. This did look like a fight that he was more in control of than Jojo Diaz.
I would have liked to have seen him win the belt.
He is a live animal against any of the other world titleists, world champions at this weight. Jamel Herring, rather the winner of Herring versus Frampton, the winner of Valdez versus Burchelt.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned Gervonta Davis, but there's not much chance of him fighting anyone with a pulse.
Yeah.